Alright, let's write a method to replace all spaces in a string with a %20 sign. And we may assume that this string has sufficient spaces towards the end to hold additional characters and that we are given the true length of the string. And we want to do it in place using character arrays in Java. So this string has 13 characters, which is given to us as a second argument, and we also have white space towards the end to include %20 signs. So now I'm searching to get familiar with char arrays in Java. So it seems like char arrays help us to manipulate strings in a better fashion. So now, alright, I'm seeing that most of the API is just like manipulating arrays. So I'm skimming through all of these. It seems like we're good to go. So now thinking about how I can use an array to solve this problem. So how would I tackle it? So should I create an array first, and then should I, when I'm creating the array, should I consider the white spaces towards the end, or should I add 20% signs while I'm creating the array? So those are the questions, and we know that arrays have fixed length. So if I want to create the array, I have to know in advance what size it will be. So maybe working from the beginning won't work. So I think that we should initialize our array to the length of our string, not the number that we're given in the second argument. So let's think about it. So let's say we create that array with the desired length. Now we are focusing on these two words for now. So we loop through from the last character, and as soon as we hit a white space, we will replace that with %20. So now checking to see whether I can convert a string to a character array in Java to see if there is any built-in method for that. And it seems like there are multiple ways. One is a manual way, which I'm thinking of doing, and the other is by using a method that is built into Java to the string class, which is toCharArray. So I won't use that. I will go with the manual way. And also there are ways to convert char arrays back to strings, but someone on Stack Overflow says that it's unnecessary in Java. So I may not do that. Right, so back into our code editor. I'm gonna comment out the calls to the function from the previous example. Now I'm gonna check the console to see if there are no errors. Alright, so now I'm going to create a new method in our arrays and strings class, and I'm going to call it URLify, and it takes a string as an input and it will return a string. So let me pseudocode this. So at first we are also given a second argument for the size, which we don't know what to do with for now. So let's pseudocode what we came up with. So we will create a char array that has the same length as our input string. So new char of size input.length, and we will loop through the string in reverse order and push to the end of the char array. And whenever we find a space, we will replace it with 20%. And we will then convert the final result, the char array, to a string if needed, and then return that string. So let me create a reverse for loop. So how would I push to the end of the char array? I think I'm just going to reference that index and then get that character from our string as well at the same index. But how am I going to handle the indexes? So I'm going to create a new variable called diff and store the difference between input length and the size that we're giving in that. So an input length could be the size of our char array as well. So what I'm thinking is that we don't need to necessarily read all those white spaces towards the end of the string. We can start from where the input tells us that is the end of the string. So that is why we are using diff. We want to create one for loop, but at the same time we want to be able to access indexes of both char array and the string with one loop. So we are writing a condition that figures out that detects when we hit a white space, and then replaces two indices before the current index with %20, and then adds to the difference so that next time we will start further back in our input string. So this didn't work. I know the logic is right, but I'm not doing something right with the indices. So it seems like I'm now counting the indices. I just noticed that now I'm trying to write some console logs to see where the error comes from. So the error is actually at the condition of this loop, and I'm getting 3 console logs when I, like by default, but when I add -1, the console logs uh, are the number that I expect. There are 2 console logs. So I'm trying to figure out what is the problem, and I just noticed that the length actually is not is one more than the last index. So I will update the for loop condition in a moment, just like that. So now that is all good. I'm also updating the loop condition. Now I just noticed that char, like the I minus diff, could go below 0 since the input string has less indices than our char array. So I had to create another condition to not let it go below 0. It takes a few moments till I notice that. And I just noticed that, and I'm now checking for it to be always positive. And I'm uncommenting the rest of the code, and I just noticed that I have index minus diff and somewhere else in the code as well. So I'm nesting all of these if statements in an outer if statement to check to see whether I minus diff is positive or not. And it's kind of now working. The only I'm not and I decided to not convert my output to a string anymore, and I'm just returning my char array. Now there's something wrong with my person 20s. The zeros are in the right place, but for some reason I don't see my person n2. So it's obviously a count issue. Like I'm not counting the indexes correctly at each iteration. So I'm just trying to increment and decrement the values of I and diff to see where I made a mistake. I could have just created a breakpoint and traced the loop to see how it performs at each iteration. But this was easier for me since this is not a huge complex function. So I'm now just checking the value of each index of char array, and I just noticed that I'm changing the value of I while adding to the array. So I thought maybe I should decrement the I later after I finish my assignments, and it seems to be working now a whole lot.